Hey guys, tonight we step into a season that does not care about optimism, bravery or good intentions. You're about to walk into a medieval winter, and I should probably warn you up front. You probably won't survive this. Not because you're weak, but because the cold itself is relentless, patient and everywhere. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a medieval village as winter tightens its grip. The sky is low and colourless, like wet wool stretched across the heavens. Snow isn't the gentle holiday kind. It's hard, crusted and sharp, blown sideways by a wind that finds every gap in your clothing. There is no forecast, no warning. Winter doesn't arrive here with drama. It simply shows up one morning and refuses to leave. One historical fact becomes immediately clear. Medieval winters lasted longer than you expect. In much of Europe, cold conditions could stretch from October to April, sometimes even May. That's half the year spent fighting numb fingers, frozen ground, and a sun that barely climbs above the horizon. You aren't counting down days until spring, you're counting meals. As you walk through the village, you notice the silence. Winter dampens sound. Footsteps crunch softly. Smoke rises straight from chimneys when the wind pauses, carrying the smell of damp wood and animal fat. This smoke matters. Fire isn't comfort here, it's survival. Without it, people die quickly. With it, they might still die slowly. Here's a quirky detail that rarely makes it into textbooks. Medieval people didn't expect houses to be warm. Warmth was localized. You warm the hearth, not the room. You warm your hands, not your feet. The idea of evenly heated space simply doesn't exist. Instead, survival means clustering, around fire, around family, around animals. Privacy is a luxury summer might offer, but winter demands togetherness. You step into a typical home, and the ceiling is low, intentionally so. Smoke stains the beams black because most homes don't have proper chimneys yet. The smoke hangs, stings your eyes, and coats your lungs. But it also kills insects and slows rot. Scholars still debate whether these smoky interiors accidentally improved health by reducing parasites, or whether they caused more long-term respiratory damage than benefit. There's no clear answer, only the knowledge that people accepted the trade-off without choice. Winter survival begins long before winter itself. This is one of the great scholarly debates. Did medieval people truly plan ahead effectively, or were they perpetually reacting? Some historians argue that peasant households were remarkably skilled at preparation, carefully managing stores of grain and fuel. Others point out that one bad harvest erased all planning. You're standing in the aftermath of summer decisions made months ago, and now those decisions judge you. Another historical reality settles in. Cold kills indirectly. Hypothermia is real, but more often winter kills through hunger, illness, and exhaustion. The body weakens. Small infections become fatal. Old injuries reopen. You don't freeze dramatically. You fade. You watch villagers move slowly, conserving energy. There's a rhythm to winter life. Wake late, sleep early, eat carefully. Calories are precious. Even walking too far costs more than it gives back. This is a season of stillness, and stillness is strategic. Here's a strange fringe belief you overhear whispered near the fire. Some villagers believe winter air itself is poisonous. Cold winds are thought to carry illness, so doors are sealed, windows blocked with cloth and straw. Ironically, this sometimes worsens disease by trapping damp air inside. Again, survival is guesswork layered over tradition. You notice how dark it is, even at midday. Candles are expensive. Tallow smells bad and burns fast. Light is rationed like food. Night arrives early and brings with it fear. Wolves, spirits, thieves, all imagined or real. Winter stretches the mind as much as the body. Class differences already show. The wealthier homes have thicker walls, better roofs, more fuel. The poor burn whatever they can. Twigs, dung, old tools. There's a historical record from England noting that during severe winters, fences and even furniture disappeared into fires. Heat now is worth more than usefulness later. One fact that surprises many modern listeners: medieval people were often better adapted to cold than we expect. Their diets were heavier in fats during winter, their clothing layered intelligently, and their daily pace aligned with daylight. But adaptation doesn't mean immunity, it just means you last longer before failing. The psychological weight of winter presses down on you. This isn't a season, it's a test repeated every year. Children are born into it, elders dread it. Everyone measures life in winters survived. A man isn't 30 years old, he's seen 30 winters, and that means something. As you settle near the fire, you realise winter survival isn't heroic. There are no dramatic speeches, no triumphs, it's quiet endurance. You breathe smoke, you eat less, you move slower, you hope your stores hold out, and you know, deep down, that winter doesn't need to defeat you, it only needs you to make one mistake. Outside, the wind keeps blowing, indifferent and tireless. Inside, you pull closer to the heat, already learning the first rule of a medieval winter survival. Stay alive tonight. Tomorrow is a separate problem. You wake with stiffness everywhere. Your joints protest before your thoughts do, and for a moment you can't tell whether the cold is inside your bones or simply pressing in from every direction. Night didn't really end, it just faded slightly. Winter mornings in the Middle Ages don't arrive with sunlight so much as reluctant permission to begin moving again. Today you start to understand how medieval homes were built not for comfort, but for resistance. These houses are defensive structures, designed to slow the cold rather than defeat it. A key historical fact becomes clear as you step outside and look again. Most medieval homes are built from whatever the land offers: wattle and daub, rough timber, stones scavenged from old ruins. There's no insulation in the modern sense. Instead, thickness is everything. Walls are heavy, uneven and solid, meant to delay the cold's advance the way armour delays a blade. You duck back inside, noticing how small the doorway is. This isn't an accident. Low doors trap heat and force everyone to bow slightly as they enter, a daily gesture of humility before winter. Ceilings are low too. Heat rises, and medieval builders may not have known the physics, but they knew the outcome. A smaller airspace means less warmth escapes upward. You live closer to the ground, closer to the fire, closer to survival. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, sometimes strewn with rushes. In wealthier homes, those rushes are changed periodically. In poorer ones, they rot slowly, mixing with ash, food scraps, and whatever else falls. Here's a quirky and uncomfortable detail. These filthy floors may have provided extra insulation. Layers of decomposing material trapped heat better than bare ground. It smells terrible, but it helps you live. Windows are rare, and when they exist, they're tiny. Glass is expensive and fragile. More often, openings are covered with oiled cloth, parchment, or wooden shutters. Light is sacrificed willingly. Cold air slipping in through a window can kill you faster than darkness ever could. Scholars still debate whether medieval people understood airflow well, or simply reacted to bitter experience, but the result is the same. Homes sealed tight against the world. You notice something else. Houses are clustered close together. Villagers huddle like animals. This isn't just about community, it's thermal strategy. Shared walls reduce exposure. Narrow lanes block wind. Every building shields the next. Survival here is architectural teamwork, even if no one ever calls it that. Inside, furniture is sparse and movable. Tables, benches, chests. Everything can be dragged closer to the fire. You don't heat rooms, you heat zones. There's a ring of life around the hearth, and everything beyond it fades quickly into cold shadow. You sleep near the fire, eat near the fire, mend clothes near the fire. The rest of the house might as well be outdoors. Here's a fringe belief whispered among builders. Some think certain woods hold warmth better than others. Oak is prized not just for strength, but for its supposed heat-retaining spirit. Modern science would argue its density and durability doing the work, but belief adds comfort, and comfort matters when logic alone isn't enough. Smoke is everywhere. It curls along the ceiling, seeps into clothing, settles into hair and skin. You smell like fire constantly. This is unpleasant, but it brings unexpected benefits. Fleas and lice hate smoke. Mold grows more slowly. Meat hung in rafters cures itself over time. Historians still argue whether medieval smoke-filled homes were a net health hazard or a crude form of environmental control. The answer, frustratingly, is probably both. You begin to see how a social status changes winter experience. A noble's hall is larger, yes, but harder to heat. Even kings shiver. Fireplaces grow grander over time, but medieval technology limits how much warmth they can deliver. Ironically, peasants in smaller homes may have been warmer than their lords, at least near the hearth. Comfort and wealth don't align neatly in winter. One documented fact surprises you. Some medieval homes were partially built into hillsides. Earth-sheltered walls kept temperatures more stable year-round. Cool in summer, less freezing in winter. This wasn't widespread knowledge, but where it existed, it worked. The ground itself became an ally. You also notice how quiet homes are. Thick walls muffle sound. Snow absorbs noise outside. Winter houses feel sealed off from time. Days blur together when the environment barely changes. This psychological insulation helps too. When the world feels smaller, endurance feels possible. As night creeps in again, far too early, you understand something essential. Medieval homes aren't meant to feel good. They're meant to keep death waiting a little longer. Every design choice, low ceilings, tiny windows, thick walls, shared spaces, is a negotiation with cold rather than a victory over it. You settle back into the familiar ring of firelight, already aware that this house, imperfect and smoky as it is, stands between you and a winter that never stops trying to get inside. You don't see the fire at first, you feel it. A dull warmth touches your shins as you edge closer, and only then do you notice the low orange glow licking at blackened stones. In a medieval winter, fire isn't decoration. It's a presence, a companion, a constant negotiation between warmth and danger. The hearth sits at the centre of everything, both physically and socially. A clear historical fact anchors this moment. In most medieval homes, there is only one fire, and it never goes out if it can be helped. Letting the hearth die means wasting precious fuel and risking that you won't be able to relight it. Matches don't exist. Fire is preserved like life itself, carried from ember to ember. You watch someone carefully rake ash aside, revealing glowing coals saved from the night before. These embers are guarded obsessively. In some villages, families share fire if one hearth fails. In others, losing your fire marks you as unlucky, or cursed. There's a quiet panic in the idea of starting over with cold stones and damp wood. Fuel dictates survival. Wood is king, but it's not always available. By midwinter, nearby forests are stripped bare. People burn peat where they can, dried animal dung where they must. Each fuel has its own smell and temperament. Peat burns slow and smoky. Dung burns weak but steady. Scholars still debate how widespread dung fuel really was in Northern Europe, but archaeological evidence suggests it was far more common than romantic history admits. Here's a quirky fact that feels almost comforting. Medieval people often talk to their fires, not in a mystical way, but familiarly. The hearth had moods. It sulked, flared, behaved. Language softened the constant anxiety of relying on something so fickle. When warmth determines survival, emotional attachment isn't strange, it's practical. Fire serves many roles at once. It heats, cooks, dries clothing, preserves food, and provides light. Every task is choreographed around it. Wet boots are held close, not too close. Bread bakes slowly at the edge. Hands rotate in and out of the heat like offerings. Burn scars are common. Everyone has one. There's an open scholarly debate about how warm medieval hearths actually made homes. Some experiments recreating period houses suggest indoor temperatures rarely rose above 50 grader, 10 grader, even with a roaring fire. That means you're still cold, just less dead. The fire doesn't conquer winter. It negotiates a ceasefire in a very small radius. Smoke management is primitive. Chimneys exist in some places by the late Middle Ages, but many homes still rely on roof vents or gaps in thatch. Smoke finds its own way out eventually. Your eyes water constantly. Your lungs ache. Yet there's an unintended benefit. Bacteria and insects struggle in smoky environments. Again, survival comes with trade-offs no one gets to refuse. Fire also structures time. You wake when it needs tending. You sleep when it's banked low. Night watches matter. Someone always listens for the crackle fading too far. In harsh winters, people sleep in shifts to keep the hearth alive. Exhaustion becomes part of the routine. Here's a fringe belief that circulates quietly. Some think fire drives away evil spirits drawn by winter darkness. Hearth charms hang nearby, carved symbols, bits of iron, even animal bones. Whether these protect from spirits or simply offer psychological comfort is still debated, but in a season where fear thrives, belief is another form of warmth. You notice how children gravitate to the fire instinctively. Elders too. The very young and very old are most vulnerable to cold. Fire becomes a magnet for life. Arguments happen near it. Stories are told near it. When someone dies in winter, the fire burns low in morning, as if even it is tired. Accidents happen, often. Houses burn. Entire villages vanish overnight. Yet people keep fires anyway. The risk of burning is acceptable compared to the certainty of freezing. This is the math of medieval winter. Danger weighed against inevitability. One documented fact underscores the seriousness. In some regions, medieval law punished anyone who deliberately extinguished another person's fire. It was considered a violent act, akin to assault. Taking warmth was taking life. As the fire settles into a steady glow, you understand its quiet tyranny. Everything depends on it. Your schedule, your safety, your sanity. Winter presses at the walls, patient and vast, but here, in this tight circle of heat and smoke, you exist. You shift closer, feeling warmth on your face and cold on your back at the same time. This is medieval winter survival in its purest form, balanced on the edge of a flame that must never ever go out. You feel it most when you stop moving. The moment your hands go still, the cold creeps back in, needling fingers and stiffening joints. That's when you understand that in a medieval winter, clothing isn't fashion, it's architecture. You don't wear warmth, you construct it around your body. A solid historical fact anchors this realization. Wool is everywhere. Wool is survival. Sheep are more valuable alive than slaughtered, because their fleece becomes the barrier between human skin and freezing air. Linen sits underneath, scratchy but breathable, pulling sweat away so dampness doesn't steal heat. Cotton is unknown here. Silk exists, but only for the wealthy, and it does very little against cold. You dress in layers, not because anyone taught you the science, but because experience demands it. Undershirt, tunic, over-tunic, cloak. Each layer traps a little more air. Each layer slows the wind. Clothing is loose by design, allowing warm air to circulate rather than escape. Tight garments look nice, but they kill. Here's a quirky detail that feels almost modern. Medieval people understand wind chill intuitively. They might not have a term for it, but they know that a calm cold day is survivable, and a windy one is lethal. Cloaks are cut wide and long to block moving air. Hoods are deep. Sleeves are generous. Every flap and fold serves a purpose. Footwear tells a grim story. Shoes are thin, often little more than leather wrapped around the foot. Soles wear down fast. Wet feet are common, and wet feet mean sickness. To compensate, people stuff shoes with straw, moss, or old cloth. It's crude, but it helps. Frostbite happens anyway. Toes go numb. Sometimes they never recover. Fur enters the picture, but not the way movies show it. Fur is usually worn inward, against the skin, to trap heat more effectively. Outward-facing fur is a luxury signal. Inward fur is a survival tactic. Rabbit, fox and sheepskin are common. Bear and wolf fur exist, but they're rare and valuable. Scholars still debate how accessible fur truly was for peasants, but even scraps made a difference. Here's a fringe belief passed quietly between generations. Certain colours are warmer. Reds and browns are thought to hold heat, while pale colours let cold through. There's no scientific basis, but belief influences choice when logic offers no certainty. If you're freezing, you'll try anything. Gloves are rare, mittens even rarer. Hands are exposed constantly for work and numb fingers slow everything. People tuck hands into sleeves, under cloaks, between thighs. It looks awkward. It works. Sleeves are long on purpose, swallowing hands like fabric shelters. Head covering is critical. A known historical fact, losing heat through the head is well understood empirically. Hats, coifs, hoods, something always covers the scalp. Baldness in winter is dangerous. Hair matters. Beards matter too. They trap moisture and freeze, but they block wind. Comfort is secondary. You notice how clothing is repaired endlessly. Patches upon patches. Nothing is thrown away. Fabric is wealth. A torn cloak isn't embarrassing, it's proof of survival. Needles work constantly through winter evenings. Fingers pricked and stiff because a hole left unattended can be fatal in January. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about hygiene and winter clothing. Some argue that layers were rarely washed, leading to disease. Others suggest frequent airing near fires and smoke-reduced bacterial growth. The truth likely sits somewhere uncomfortable in between, clean enough to survive, dirty enough to smell like winter itself. Children wear miniature versions of adult clothing, but thinner. They feel cold faster. Mothers wrap them tightly, bind extra cloth around legs and chests. Infant mortality spikes in winter. No amount of wool can fully protect a body that small. You learn to sleep in your clothes. Undressing wastes heat. Cloaks become blankets. Bodies pressed together. This isn't intimacy, it's strategy. Warmth is shared because it must be. As you adjust your layers, tugging fabric tighter against the wind seeping through cracks, you realise clothing is your first defence and last hope. Fire warms space. Houses slow cold. But clothing goes with you into fields, roads and sleep. Winter doesn't care what you wear, but you care very much. Every thread is a decision. Every layer is time bought. And in a season that measures life in nights endured, that's everything. You start to feel hunger before you fully understand it. It isn't the sharp, dramatic pain you might expect. It's dull, constant, like a weight pressing gently but relentlessly behind your ribs. In a medieval winter, food isn't about satisfaction. It's about staying functional long enough to see another sunrise. A hard historical fact sets the tone. Most medieval communities live on the edge of calorie sufficiency, even in good years. Winter is when the margin disappears. Fields lie frozen, gardens are dead, and what you eat now had to be grown, killed, or preserved months ago. There is no emergency supply chain. There is only what you stored and what you didn't. Grain is everything. Bread is life. Wheat for the wealthy, rye or barley for everyone else. Bread stretches meals, fills stomachs, and delivers calories efficiently. In winter, loaves get darker, heavier, and sometimes mouldy. Mould is scraped off and eaten anyway. Hunger rewrites standards quickly. Here's a quirky detail that feels unsettling. Medieval people often preferred stale bread in winter. Fresh bread moulds faster in damp homes, while hard loaves last longer and can be softened in broth or ale. Teeth suffer. Survival doesn't care. Meat is rare, but not absent. Pigs slaughtered in autumn become salted pork and bacon. Beef and mutton are dried or smoked. Salt is precious, expensive, and powerful. Without enough salt, meat rots. With too much, it dehydrates you. Balancing preservation is a learned skill, passed down carefully. A scholarly debate lingers here. How much protein did medieval peasants actually eat in winter? Some historians argue diets were overwhelmingly grain-based, with meat reserved for feast days. Others point to bone evidence suggesting regular animal protein consumption. The truth varies by region, year, and luck. Winter doesn't treat everyone equally. Vegetables survive only if they're tough. Cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips. Roots pulled from cellars where they've been buried in sand or straw. Potatoes don't exist here yet. Variety is minimal. Vitamins are scarce. Scurvy appears occasionally, especially after long winters. Here's a fringe belief whispered near the cooking pot. Certain foods are warming. Onions, garlic, and fatty meats are thought to heat the blood. Cold foods, like raw vegetables, are avoided. Medieval medicine is guided by humoral theory, and winter is a cold, wet season requiring hot, dry foods to balance the body. Whether it helps or not, it shapes every meal. Ale becomes more important than water. A known historical fact: weak beer is safer to drink than water in many medieval towns. Brewing kills pathogens and ale provides calories. Children drink it. Everyone drinks it. In winter, ale thickens, sometimes barely fermented, more like liquid bread than alcohol. Meals shrink as winter drags on. Early winter feels manageable. Late winter is dangerous. This period even has a name: the hunger gap. Supplies run low just as bodies are weakest. People stretch meals with water, with air, with hope. You notice how meals are communal. Eating alone is rare. Food is shared not out of kindness alone, but efficiency. One fire, one pot, one meal feeds many. Social bonds tighten around scarcity. There's no snacking, no casual eating, every bite is counted, consciously or not. Children learn early not to complain. Elders eat last sometimes, quietly sacrificing without ceremony. One documented fact feels especially heavy. Famine doesn't always announce itself. It creeps in. A little less bread today, a skipped meal tomorrow. By the time hunger becomes obvious, it's already late. As you swallow a thick, lukewarm stew, more grain than anything else, you feel how food fuels heat. Without enough, cold feels sharper. Muscles tire faster. The body starts rationing itself. Winter survival isn't about having enough food. It's about not running out before winter does. And as you scrape the bowl clean, you realize every meal is a small victory, and a reminder that the season is far from finished. By now, winter has lost its novelty. The early resolve has worn thin, and what remains is endurance. You wake one morning and realize the food tastes flatter, the fire seems weaker, and your body feels slower to respond. This is the part of winter medieval people feared most, the long middle stretch sliding toward the hunger months. A firm historical fact grounds this stage. Late winter and early spring were the deadliest times of the medieval year. Not the first snows, not the darkest days, but the weeks when stores were low and the next harvest still distant. People survived December. February decided who made it to April. You feel meals shrink again. Bread is thinner. Stew is more water than substance. Salted meat is rationed carefully, sliced so fine it's almost transparent. Fat becomes the most prized resource of all. A spoonful of grease added to a pot can change how your body handles the cold. Here's a quirky and slightly grim detail. People save animal bones long after the meat is gone. In late winter, bones are boiled repeatedly to extract the last traces of fat and flavour. The broth is thin, but it's warm. It's something. Archaeologists find bones cracked open from marrow extraction. A silent record of desperation. The body begins to change. Weight drops. Cheeks hollow. Small cuts heal slower. Illness lingers. You feel cold even near the fire. This isn't imagination. It's metabolism slowing as the body conserves energy. Medieval people don't know the science, but they recognize the signs. Winter weakness, they call it in some regions. There's an open scholarly debate about how communities managed rationing. Some evidence suggests informal systems where households shared or loaned food with expectations of repayment after harvest. Others argue that survival became strictly individual once scarcity peaked. The truth likely depends on trust, memory, and how many winters a village has already survived together. Here's a fringe belief that surfaces in these weeks. Eating less makes you more virtuous. Hunger is reframed as moral testing. This belief doesn't reduce pain, but it gives it meaning. Churches reinforce this idea, blending fasting with necessity until no one remembers where one ends and the other begins. Children suffer most now. Their growth pauses. Some don't survive. Medieval records often list death simply as weakness, a word that hides hunger, cold, and disease under one quiet label. Parents notice children sleeping more, moving less, conserving energy instinctively. You notice how work slows. Tasks are chosen carefully. If it costs more calories than it gives back, it waits. Repairs are postponed. Travel is avoided. Even conversation shortens. Words, like food, are conserved. There's a historical account from Northern Europe describing villagers grinding acorns into flour during severe winters. Acorns are bitter and require careful leaching, but they stretch grain. In good years, this knowledge sleeps. In bad ones, it wakes. Here's another strange detail. Dreams change during hunger months. People report vivid, repetitive dreams of food. Scholars debate whether this is psychological or physiological, but the pattern appears across cultures. Even sleep isn't an escape. Firewood grows scarce too. People burn furniture, tools, even parts of buildings. The future is sacrificed to survive the present. Houses emerge from winter damaged, patched, half-gutted, but standing. You feel time stretch. Days blur. There's no milestone except endurance. No celebration until the first signs of thaw. And even then, hunger often peaks before relief arrives. As you sip another bowl of thin broth, you understand why medieval winters weren't remembered for snow, but for waiting. Waiting for warmth. Waiting for green. Waiting to see who is still there when winter finally loosens its grip. By the time winter reaches its deepest point, you're living almost entirely on memory. Memory of full meals, of warm days, of abundance that feels half imagined now. This is when preservation, decisions made months ago, either saves you or quietly fails. A clear historical fact anchors this moment. Medieval survival depended heavily on food preserved during autumn. Without refrigeration, people relied on techniques refined over generations: salting, smoking, drying, pickling, and fermenting. Winter reveals which methods worked and which were wishful thinking. You visit the smokehouse, a dark, narrow structure where meat hangs like shadows. Smoke clings to everything. It's slow, deliberate work. Meat must dry without rotting, cure without becoming inedible. Too much moisture invites mold. Too much heat spoils fat. There's no thermometer, just experience, smell, and constant attention. Here's a quirky detail. Some families believe certain woods give better flavour and protection. Alder, apple, oak. Each carries a reputation. Whether the chemistry matters or not, these beliefs guide choices that feel life or death. Drying goes beyond meat. Fish is split and hung. Apples are sliced thin and strung like beads. Herbs are bundled and suspended from rafters. Every edible thing that can survive air is encouraged to do so. Winter eats the results slowly, methodically. Salted foods dominate now. Salt draws moisture out, killing bacteria. It also pulls moisture from you. Thirst becomes constant. Ale helps. So does melted snow when nothing else is available, though some believe snow causes illness. Scholars still debate whether this belief stemmed from contamination or superstition. Fermentation works quietly in barrels and crocks. Sauerkraut-like cabbage, sour turnips, thin wines, vinegars. These foods smell strong, taste sharp, and keep longer than anything else. A fringe belief claims fermented foods wake the blood in winter. Modern science would nod quietly at the vitamin content. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how widespread fermentation knowledge truly was among peasants. Some argue it was basic and universal. Others suggest it varied widely by region. What's certain is that where it existed, winter survival improved. You notice how carefully preserved food is guarded. Cellars are locked. Barrels are checked obsessively. Mold is scraped, not discarded. Waste is unforgivable. Preservation extends beyond food. Clothing is stored carefully, protected from damp and pests. Tools are greased. Seeds for spring are hidden and counted repeatedly. Eating seed grain is the final line, and once crossed, it means gambling next year's survival for today's. Here's a strange but documented detail. Some medieval households sealed food stores with ritual marks or prayers. Theft is feared, but so is spoilage attributed to spirits or curses. Whether these rituals worked or not, they enforced care and vigilance. You also see preservation in social form. Knowledge itself is preserved. Recipes, techniques, warnings. Elders repeat instructions endlessly during winter evenings. This isn't nostalgia, it's insurance. By late winter, preserved food tastes of smoke, salt, and time. Freshness is a memory. But these flavours mean life. They mean someone planned ahead, someone remembered last winter's mistakes. As you chew a strip of leathery meat, tough but nourishing, You feel the weight of months resting on it. Preservation is patience made edible, and in a season that devours the unprepared, patience is the quiet hero that keeps you breathing. By now, you've stopped thinking of drink as refreshment. In winter, what you drink is food, medicine, and reassurance all at once. You reach for a mug not because you're thirsty, but because warmth and calories can still flow when solid meals grow thin. A solid historical fact anchors this habit. Medieval Europeans consumed ale or beer daily, often in large quantities and especially during winter. This wasn't about intoxication. Most ale was weak, barely fermented, and safer than water. Brewing killed many pathogens, and the grain left behind turned liquid into nourishment. You watch ale being ladled from a barrel cloudy and pale. It smells yeasty, almost bready. This is small beer, brewed quickly and meant to be drunk within days. Children drink it, workers drink it, elders sip it slowly near the fire. In winter, it thickens, sometimes spoonable, depending on how much grain is left to spare. Here's a quirky detail that feels almost comforting. Medieval people judged ale by how long it warmed the stomach. A good winter brew isn't strong, it's sustaining. If it leaves you cold again too quickly, it's considered a failure. Ale provides calories, B vitamins, and hydration. When food is scarce, it fills gaps. Some monasteries allowed monks several litres per day during fasting seasons, acknowledging quietly that liquid grain still counts as survival. There's an open scholarly debate about alcohol's impact on winter health. Some argue it worsened dehydration and accidents. Others point out that weak ale contained little alcohol and substantial nutrition. The consensus leans toward ale as a net benefit, especially compared to untreated water. You notice how brewing schedules change with the season. In winter, brewing slows. Cold temperatures affect fermentation. Barrels are insulated, sometimes wrapped in straw or buried partially in the ground to keep yeast alive. Knowledge of yeast isn't scientific, but it's practiced with care. Here's a fringe belief passed around mugs. Ale drives away cold humours. People believe it heats the blood and lifts the spirit, both crucial when daylight is scarce. Mood matters. Despair kills quietly. Wine exists too, but mostly for the wealthy or for religious use. In colder regions, wine freezes or spoils. Ale adapts. It belongs to winter in a way wine never quite does. You also see how drink structures community. Winter evenings revolve around shared mugs. Stories flow more easily. Arguments soften. Ale doesn't erase hardship, but it blunts its edge. In a season defined by waiting, mild intoxication shortens time. One documented detail stands out. Some towns regulated winter ale prices to prevent exploitation. Authorities understood that ale wasn't luxury, it was necessity. Gouging during winter could spark unrest. As you drink, you feel warmth spread, subtle but real. Your stomach relaxes, muscles unclench slightly. The cold remains, but it steps back a fraction. Winter survival isn't glamorous. Sometimes it's a mug of cloudy beer passed hand to hand, reminding you that grain still exists somewhere in the world, and that, for tonight, you're not alone in the cold. You notice the smell before anything else. It's warm, sour, earthy, unmistakably alive. In winter, the boundary between human and animal life thins until it almost disappears. You aren't just sharing space with livestock, you're sharing heat. A clear historical fact anchors this arrangement. Throughout much of medieval Europe, animals were housed inside or directly adjacent to human dwellings during winter. Cows, goats, sheep, even chickens moved closer when the cold set in. This wasn't sentimentality. It was thermal economics. You step into a byre house, a structure where animals occupy one end, and people the other. A low wall or wooden partition separates them, but heat travels freely. Body warmth rises, ammonia hangs in the air, and the floor stays unfrozen. It smells terrible. It works. Here's a quirky detail that feels strangely intimate. People could tell which animal was sick just by listening at night. Breathing patterns, shifting weight, restless hooves. Livestock were as familiar as family members. In winter, losing an animal meant losing warmth, food, labour, and future survival all at once. Animals are wealth on 4 legs. They aren't slaughtered lightly. A cow provides milk, manure, traction, and calves. Killing it for meat solves a short-term problem and creates a long-term disaster. Winter forces careful calculation. There's an open, scholarly debate about hygiene versus survival here. Modern sensibilities recoil at animals indoors, but some historians argue that the warmth and manure actually improved crop yields and winter survival rates. Others point to disease transmission. As with most winter strategies, it's a trade-off, not a solution. Manure matters. In winter, it's piled high, fermenting slowly, generating heat. In some regions, dung heaps are built against house walls for insulation. It's not pleasant, but it blocks wind and retains warmth. Medieval people use everything. Here's a fringe belief whispered among herders. Animals sense harsh winters before humans do. Restless behaviour, thicker coats, refusal to leave shelter, these signs are taken seriously. Decisions about slaughtering or conserving fodder hinge on animal behaviour. Fodder becomes critical. Hay stored since summer is rationed carefully. Animals lose weight just like people. You see ribs showing. Milk production drops. Everyone accepts this as normal. Winter is about survival, not productivity. Chickens roost indoors, often above people. Eggs disappear almost entirely in deep winter. When one appears, it's a gift. Feathers add insulation, stuffed into bedding and clothing. You also notice emotional bonds forming. Long nights spent listening to animals breathe create familiarity. Some people talk to them, some pray over them. When an animal dies in winter, grief is practical and personal. A documented fact underscores the stakes. Medieval legal records include fines for neglecting communal livestock during winter. Animals aren't private luxuries, they're community assets. One person's negligence can cost everyone. As you settle near the thin wall separating you from a cow's steady warmth, you feel the strange comfort of shared survival. Humans and animals endure winter together, bound by necessity. The cold presses outside, but inside, breath, bodies and patience generate just enough warmth to hold winter at bay for another night. Winter does not pause work, it reshapes it. You wake before dawn, not because there's much light to use, but because daylight is too scarce to waste. Every task is weighed against the cold, the calories it costs, and the risk it carries. A solid historical fact frames this rhythm. Medieval peasants worked year-round, and winter labour, though different from summer, was essential for survival. Fields may be frozen, but life doesn't stop. It simply turns inward. You start with maintenance. Tools are repaired, sharpened, and rehandled. A broken hoe in spring could mean missed planting, and missed planting means starvation next winter. Winter is when hands mend what summer breaks. Firewood dominates thought. You walk carefully into stripped woods, cutting dead branches, splitting frozen logs. Wood is heavier in winter, damp and stubborn. Every swing of the axe burns calories you can't afford to waste. People work slowly, deliberately, resting often. Speed is dangerous. Here's a quirky detail that feels almost modern. Medieval workers pace themselves intentionally in winter. Bursts of effort followed by stillness. Sweat is avoided at all costs. Wet clothing in freezing air can kill. You learn to stop before warmth turns to moisture. Indoor work fills long hours. Spinning wool, weaving cloth, carving wood, repairing nets. Winter is productive in quiet ways. This labour keeps hands busy and minds occupied. Idleness invites despair. There's an open scholarly debate about gendered winter labour. Some historians argue women's work intensified in winter, producing textiles essential for trade and household use. Others suggest men and women both shifted roles fluidly as needed. What's clear is that everyone worked if they could. Children contribute too. They fetch water, mind animals, twist fibres, clean tools. Childhood is short. Winter accelerates it. Small hands matter. Here's a fringe belief that circulates during long evenings. Working keeps the cold away. People say stillness invites illness. Whether this belief stems from observation or anxiety, it keeps people moving just enough to stay warm. Travel is minimised. Roads vanish under snow and mud. Rivers freeze unpredictably. When travel happens, it's risky. Merchants gamble lives on winter journeys. Some never return. Villages mark their absence quietly and move on. You notice how daylight controls everything. work stops early. Candles are too precious to waste. Night is for rest, storytelling, quiet repairs near the fire. Time stretches, measured in tasks completed rather than hours passed. A documented fact adds weight here. Winter accidents were common. Frozen fingers shattered by tools, falls on ice, limbs crushed by timber. Injury in winter is more dangerous than in summer. Healing is slower. Infection is more likely. Yet work continues, because stopping invites worse outcomes. Winter labour is about preventing future disaster, not immediate reward. As you sit by the fire, hands aching from careful effort, you understand that medieval survival isn't passive endurance. It's constant, calculated movement, just enough to keep life going, without tipping into exhaustion. Winter demands patience, and work is how you practice it. By the time winter settles into your lungs, you realise the cold itself isn't the only enemy. Illness moves quietly through homes already weakened by hunger, smoke, and fatigue. Winter doesn't just test bodies, it exposes every weakness they carry. A firm historical fact anchors this danger. Medieval winters saw spikes in disease and mortality, especially respiratory illnesses. Crowded homes, poor ventilation, and constant smoke create perfect conditions for sickness. The cold doesn't cause disease, but it opens the door and holds it wide. You hear coughing everywhere, deep, rattling coughs that linger for weeks. Fevers flare and fade. People speak of chest sickness and winter ague, names that blur symptoms into seasons. Diagnosis is less important than endurance. Here's a quirky detail that feels unsettling. Medieval people often believed cold air itself entered the body and caused illness. To counter this, doors and windows are sealed obsessively. Ironically, this traps smoke and pathogens inside. Scholars still debate whether fear of cold air worsened winter disease outbreaks. The evidence suggests it probably did. Medical care exists, but it's limited. Physicians are rare and expensive. Most care happens at home. Herbal remedies simmer constantly. Thyme, sage, garlic, honey when available. Some of these help, others do nothing. All provide hope. There's an open scholarly debate about the effectiveness of medieval medicine. While humoral theory misidentified causes, many treatments were palliative rather than harmful. Warmth, rest and hydration, often through ale, are prescribed, and these genuinely help survival. Here's a fringe belief passed between bedsides. Illness leaves the body through sweat. People are bundled tightly, encouraged to sweat out sickness. This sometimes helps fevers break. Sometimes it worsens dehydration. Winter offers no perfect choices. You notice how disease spreads through families quickly. One fire, one room, one bed. Isolation is impossible. When someone falls ill, everyone adjusts. Work pauses, food is shared differently, attention shifts. Survival becomes collective. Children and elders fall first. A mild illness for an adult can be fatal for them. Winter mortality records show grim patterns, with deaths clustering after cold snaps or food shortages. You also see fear-shaped behaviour. Sick visitors are avoided. Strangers are watched carefully. Hospitality tightens in harsh winters, despite cultural expectations. Survival overrides custom. A documented fact adds weight. Some medieval towns imposed winter quarantines during outbreaks, restricting movement long before germ theory existed. Experience taught caution, even without understanding. As you tend the fire, adding just enough fuel to keep the room warm but not smoky, you realise how fragile health is here. One cough, too deep, one fever too long, and winter claims another quietly. Survival isn't just about warmth and food, it's about holding illness at bay long enough for the season to end. And as night falls again, you listen to the breathing around you, counting slow, steady rhythms as victories. When the cold refuses to lift and sickness lingers, you turn to something older than fire or food. You turn to belief. Winter presses not just on the body but on the mind, and medieval people meet that pressure with faith, ritual, and superstition woven tightly together. The clear historical fact grounds this turn inward. Religion structured medieval life year-round, but winter intensified its presence. Short days, high mortality, and isolation pushed people toward prayer as both comfort and explanation. Churches filled more often when the world outside felt hostile. You attend services huddled in thick cloaks, breath visible in the air. Churches are cold too. Stone holds chill like memory. Candles flicker weakly, but voices rise together. Communal prayer creates warmth of a different kind. For a moment, fear softens. Here's a quirky detail that feels intimate. People prayed specifically against cold, not just for spring, but for mercy from frost, hunger, and sickness. Saints associated with weather or protection gained popularity during harsh winters. Their feast days became emotional milestones. There's an open scholarly debate about whether faith genuinely improved survival or merely offered psychological relief. Some historians argue belief reduced stress and encouraged communal care. Others say it delayed practical responses. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere between hope and habit. Superstition blends seamlessly with doctrine. Hearth charms are blessed. Animals are crossed with holy water. Bread is marked with signs before baking. These rituals don't change temperature, but they change perception. Feeling protected matters. Here's a fringe belief whispered in winter shadows. Spirits roam more freely when nights are long. Ghosts, demons, and wandering souls are blamed for illness or bad luck. Fires are kept lit not just for warmth, but to keep unseen things at bay. Fasting becomes complicated. Winter scarcity forces unintentional fasting, yet religious calendars still demand it. Rules bend quietly. Priests look the other way when survival conflicts with doctrine. Compassion grows practical. You notice how stories shift in winter. Tales of punishment give way to tales of endurance. Saints suffer cold and hunger, and survive through faith. These stories mirror daily life, offering models of patience rather than escape. A documented fact stands out. Churches often acted as centres for winter aid. Alms, bread distributions, shelter for travellers. Faith translates into tangible warmth when possible. As night deepens, bells mark time in a world without clocks. Sound carries through cold air, reminding you that others are awake, enduring, alongside you. Belief doesn't melt snow or fill granaries, but it steadies the mind. In a season where despair is as dangerous as hunger, that steadiness keeps people moving forward. You bow your head, not necessarily certain of answers, but grateful for the pause. Winter remains, vast and indifferent, but belief gives it edges, meaning, and the promise, however fragile, that it will eventually pass. You begin to notice the differences more clearly now, not just between warm and cold, but between who survives comfortably and who barely survives at all. Winter doesn't treat everyone equally. It never has. A hard historical fact anchors this divide. Social class in the Middle Ages directly affected winter survival. Wealth determined housing quality, food stores, access to fuel and medical care. Cold was universal, but suffering was not evenly shared. You walk past homes with thicker walls, multiple hearths, and servants whose job is to keep fires fed through the night. Inside there's still chill but not desperation. Meals remain predictable. Illness is met with rest rather than panic. Then you step back into poorer quarters. One fire for many bodies. Thin walls, fewer layers of clothing, meals stretched to breaking. Winter here feels sharper, louder, more dangerous. Here's a quirky detail that feels cruel. In some towns, poorer families slept in shifts near the fire, rotating warmth. Wealthier households didn't need to. Heat, like time, could be owned. There's an open scholarly debate about whether medieval elites truly lived more comfortably in winter, or simply endured different hardships. Large stone halls were difficult to heat, and nobles often complained bitterly about cold. Yet complaints don't equal hunger. Privilege buffers suffering even when it doesn't eliminate discomfort. Food access reveals the clearest gap. Wealth means variety. Salted meats, imported spices believed to warm the body, wine instead of weak ale. Poor diets narrow to grain and hope. Hunger teaches inequality faster than sermons ever could. Fuel access matters too. Wealthy estates own woodland. Peasants rely on common land, often regulated tightly. Gathering fallen wood illegally risks punishment. Winter forces impossible choices, freeze or break the law. Here's a fringe belief whispered among the poor. The rich are colder inside because they lack hardship. It's a small comfort, turning inequality into moral balance, even if reality disagrees. Disease follows class lines unevenly. Crowded housing spreads illness faster. Malnutrition weakens resistance. When epidemics hit in winter, mortality spikes hardest among the poor. Records show this pattern again and again. A documented fact deepens the contrast. During harsh winters, some towns expelled beggars fearing disease and scarcity. Charity tightened when it was needed most. Survival turned inward. Yet winter also exposes dependence. The wealthy rely on poor labour to maintain estates, haul fuel and tend animals. When peasants fall ill or die, elite comfort erodes. Winter binds classes together even as it separates them. You feel the tension everywhere. Resentment simmers quietly, but open rebellion waits for warmer months. Winter is about endurance, not upheaval. As you settle back near a modest fire, you understand that medieval winter survival is shaped as much by social structure as by temperature. Cold reveals inequality clearly, carving lines that last long after the snow melts. When winter tightens its grip and options run thin, you start noticing certain doors that stay open. Heavy wooden doors, reinforced with iron, often marked by a cross. Monasteries. In a season defined by scarcity, these places become islands of relative stability. A clear historical fact anchors their role. Medieval monasteries and convents functioned as major centres of winter relief. Bound by religious duty and supported by landholdings, they provided food, shelter and medical care, especially during harsh winters. You step into a monastery guest hall, and the difference is immediate. It's still cold, but ordered. Fires burn more steadily. Meals are plain, but regular. There's a schedule, and schedules create calm. Here's a quirky detail that feels surprisingly modern. Monasteries kept detailed winter inventories. Grain, ale, candles, firewood, all counted and recorded. This bureaucratic discipline often meant monks survived winters better than surrounding villages. There's an open scholarly debate about the generosity of monasteries. Some historians portray them as the vital safety nets. Others argue their charity was limited, selective, or motivated by social control. Both views hold truth. Resources were finite, even behind cloistered walls. Monastic infirmaries matter most in winter. Sick travellers, injured peasants, and elderly villagers sometimes find care here when nowhere else can offer it. Herbal knowledge is preserved and practiced. Warmth, rest, and cleanliness, by medieval standards, improve survival odds. Here's a fringe belief circulating outside monastery walls. Monks are protected by God from winter's worst effects. This belief isn't entirely true, but the perception draws people in, reinforcing monasteries as spiritual and practical refuges. Monks themselves aren't comfortable. Their rules often limit fire use, enforce fasting, and demand night prayers in unheated chapels. Winter tests their devotion brutally. Some rules are relaxed during extreme cold, revealing the tension between ideal and survival. A documented fact stands out. During severe winters, monasteries sometimes distributed extra bread or ale to nearby poor, fearing unrest as much as acting from charity. Compassion and pragmatism walk together. You notice how monasteries preserve knowledge through winter. Manuscripts are copied, records are kept, skills are taught. While fields sleep, learning continues, quietly shaping the future. As you leave the guest hall, warmed but aware of limits, you understand monasteries as winter anchors. They don't end suffering, but they soften its edges. In a world where survival often depends on who you know and where you can go, these institutions matter deeply. Winter still stretches ahead, but knowing such places exist changes how you face it. Less alone, more hopeful, and keenly aware that endurance sometimes lives behind stone walls and steady routines. At some point, winter demands movement. A message must be carried, supplies sought, a family member checked on. And when that moment comes, you understand just how dangerous medieval travel becomes once the cold settles in. A firm historical fact anchors this risk. Winter travel in the Middle Ages was slower, more dangerous, and often deadly. Roads weren't paved highways. They were rutted tracks that turned to ice, mud, or vanished entirely under snow. Signposts were rare. Maps were unreliable. Getting lost was easy. You step onto a road that barely deserves the name. Snow fills the ruts. Ice hides beneath slush. Each step threatens a twisted ankle, or worse. A fall here, far from shelter, can end a life quietly. Here's a quirky detail that feels ominous. In some regions, people followed fences, tree lines, or even stars to navigate in winter when roads disappeared. Memory replaced infrastructure. Lose your bearings and panic follows quickly. Bridges are treacherous. Wood cracks in cold. Stone becomes slick. Rivers freeze unevenly, creating false confidence. Crossing ice is a gamble, taken only when hunger or duty outweighs fear. There's an open scholarly debate about how much trade continued through winter. Some argue commerce slowed to a crawl. Others point to winter fairs and long-distance trade routes that persisted despite conditions. What's clear is that winter travel separated the desperate from the cautious. You travel lightly. Heavy loads slow you and burn calories. Every item carried must justify its weight. Food, fire-starting tools, extra cloth, nothing else matters. Here's a fringe belief whispered before departure. Speaking of disaster invites it. Travellers avoid saying goodbye, avoid naming dangers. Silence feels safer. Inns and roadside shelters become lifelines. Their fires are never guaranteed. Some are closed, others are overcrowded. Prices rise, kindness varies. A warm corner can mean survival. A documented fact adds weight. Medieval legal codes sometimes required villages to aid stranded travellers during winter storms. Enforcement was inconsistent, but the idea reveals how dangerous travel was recognised to be. You notice how winter empties roads. Silence stretches. When you meet another traveller, there's brief eye contact, relief mixed with suspicion. Companionship improves survival, but trust is risky. As you finally reach shelter, muscles aching, toes numb, you understand why winter shrinks the world. Distances grow, longer. Familiar places feel remote. Travel becomes a calculated risk rather than routine. Survival often depends on staying put, and when you can't, winter reminds you that movement itself is one of its deadliest challenges. By now, you've learned that surviving winter alone is nearly impossible. Even the strongest body weakens eventually. Even the best-stocked household can be undone by one accident, one illness, one missed calculation. This is where community stops being a pleasant idea and becomes the difference between life and death. A clear historical fact anchors this truth. Medieval villages depended heavily on communal cooperation during winter. Shared labour, shared resources, and shared risk formed an informal safety net long before the idea had a name. Isolation wasn't independence, it was danger. You see it in small things first. Neighbours checking whether smoke still rises from a chimney. Someone quietly leaving a bundle of firewood by a door without comment. A loaf divided into thinner slices so one more mouth can eat. These acts aren't sentimental, they're strategic. A village weakened by loss becomes more vulnerable to everyone else's survival. Here's a quirky detail that feels almost tender. In some regions, people knocked on doors in the evening simply to confirm everyone was still alive. No conversation needed, just presence. Winter makes silence suspicious. There's an open scholarly debate about how altruistic medieval communities truly were. Some historians emphasize mutual aid and shared responsibility. Others point out records of abandonment and conflict during severe winters. Both are true. Community holds until pressure breaks it, and the breaking point varies. Communal work intensifies. Snow is cleared together. Roofs are repaired before collapse. Animals are herded and fed cooperatively. These tasks cost calories, but they prevent greater losses. Winter labour becomes collective problem-solving. Here's a fringe belief that circulates during long nights. Winter punishes selfishness. Stories spread of hoarders struck by illness or misfortune. Whether these tales reflect reality or moral teaching, they reinforce sharing when fear might otherwise close fists. Village leadership matters now. Elders, reeves, or councils decide how to distribute aid, enforce wood-gathering rules, or support the sick. Fair leadership keeps tension low. Poor decisions fracture trust quickly. A documented fact underscores this fragility. Some medieval villages dissolved entirely after consecutive harsh winters. Too many deaths, too little labour, too much fear. Community failure was as deadly as cold itself. You notice rituals forming around survival, shared meals on certain nights, collective prayers, rotations of care for the ill. These routines reduce uncertainty, and uncertainty is exhausting. Children learn these lessons early. They're sent with messages, food, or firebrands between houses. Responsibility arrives fast in winter. As you sit among neighbours near a shared fire, listening to familiar breathing and the crackle of wood, you feel something warmer than heat. Winter narrows the world, but community fills the space it leaves behind. Survival here isn't heroic or solitary. It's collective endurance, many small acts repeated quietly, holding winter back one night at a time. When you look closely at winter survival, you start seeing its smallest victims first. Children experience medieval winter differently, not as a season to endure, but as the only world they know. Cold shapes their bodies, their habits, and their chances before they ever understand what spring is supposed to feel like. A firm historical fact anchors this reality. Childhood mortality in the Middle Ages was highest during winter and early spring. Infants and young children were especially vulnerable to cold, hunger, and disease. Surviving your first few winters was an unspoken milestone. You watch adults wrap children in layers of wool and linen, binding cloth tightly around chests and legs. Infants are swaddled almost constantly. Movement is limited, but warmth is preserved. Cries are answered quickly, not only with comfort, but with fear of energy loss. Here's a quirky detail that feels heartbreakingly practical. Children are often placed between adults when sleeping. Bodies become blankets. This isn't affection alone, it's insulation. Family beds grow crowded in winter, and no one complains. Food is adjusted for children as best as possible. Porridge thinned with water, bread softened in ale. When supplies run low, adults sometimes eat less so children can eat more. This sacrifice is rarely recorded, but it's implied everywhere. There's an open scholarly debate about whether medieval parents were emotionally distant due to high mortality. Winter suggests the opposite. The effort poured into keeping children alive through cold months argues for deep attachment, even when loss was common. Play doesn't disappear, but it changes. Children move less, play near the fire, invent games with scraps and shadows. Outdoor play is limited and dangerous. Frostbite isn't theoretical, it happens. Here's a fringe belief whispered by caretakers. Children who survive harsh winters grow stronger. Winter becomes a test, a proving ground. This belief doesn't save lives, but it helps adults endure grief. Education slows or pauses in winter for many. Cold fingers struggle with writing. Schools close. Learning shifts to oral instruction. Stories, prayers, practical skills taught near the hearth. A documented fact deepens the picture. Orphanhood increased after severe winters. Communities absorbed these children when possible. Some were fostered, others worked early. Winter reshaped family structures quietly. You notice how children mirror adult behaviour. They conserve energy. They don't complain loudly. They learn patience early. Winter teaches lessons no one chooses to teach. As you watch a child drift to sleep near the fire, face smudged with soot, you understand that medieval winter survival isn't just about making it through the season. It's about carrying life forward into a future that might be warmer, kinder, and more forgiving. You start hearing older people talk about winters that felt different. Longer, harsher, less predictable. Stories of rivers freezing solid, of summers that never quite warmed. At first they sound like exaggeration. Then you realise they're remembering a shift. A clear historical fact anchors this unease. Beginning in the late Middle Ages, Europe experienced periods of cooler climate now associated with the Little Ice Age. Winters grew colder and longer, and harvests became less reliable. Survival strategies that once worked began to fail. You feel the difference in how people talk about preparation. Old rules don't always apply. Snow lingers. Frost returns unexpectedly. Spring arrives late and weak. Winter feels like it's encroaching on territory it didn't own before. Here's a quirky detail that feels ominous. Church records note frozen wine cellars in regions where that had been rare. Bells ring to mark ice breakup on rivers. When it finally happens, climate becomes something worth documenting. There's an open scholarly debate about the exact causes of the Little Ice Age. Volcanic activity, solar variation, deforestation. Arguments swirl. Medieval people don't know the causes, only the consequences. Knowledge without control is still fear. Famine memories grow sharper. A single cold summer followed by a harsh winter can devastate communities. Grain fails to ripen. Hay rots in fields. Animals starve alongside people. Winter becomes the executioner, but summer hands it the sentence. Here's a fringe belief that spreads quickly. God is angry. Colder winters are interpreted as punishment or warning. Religious fervour intensifies. So does blame. Outsiders, heretics, and the marginalised feel pressure rise as fear seeks targets. Communities adapt slowly. New crops are tried. Planting schedules shift. More emphasis is placed on storage. But adaptation lags behind change. Winter doesn't wait for consensus. A documented fact underscores the scale. Some medieval settlements were abandoned permanently after repeated cold years. Fields returned to forest. Villages faded into memory. Climate reshaped maps quietly. You notice how language changes. People stop saying this winter and start saying these winters. The cold feels collective, ongoing, no longer an exception. As you listen to elders recount frozen springs and failed harvests, you feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Surviving one winter is hard enough. Surviving a changing climate tests something deeper. Winter is no longer just a season, it's a pattern. And in that realization, medieval endurance takes on a new, heavier meaning. Survival without the promise that next year will be better. Once winter has stretched beyond memory, it begins to haunt. Even when you're warm enough for the moment, your thoughts drift backward. To winters that broke people. To years when cold didn't loosen its grip at all. These memories shape how you face the present, sharpening fear into caution. A firm historical fact anchors this lingering dread. Medieval communities carried collective memories of famine winters for generations. Stories of starvation, mass death, and social collapse were passed down orally, influencing behaviour long after conditions improved. Memory itself became a survival tool. You hear names spoken quietly, years marked not by numbers but by suffering. The winter of hunger. The year the cattle died. These labels need no explanation. Everyone understands what they mean. Here's a quirky and unsettling detail. Some families kept physical reminders of famine winters. Tools worn thin from overuse, empty vessels never discarded, even bones saved as warnings. These objects weren't morbid curiosities. They were lessons made tangible. There's an open scholarly debate about how accurate famine memories were. Some historians argue oral traditions exaggerated severity over time. Others point to archaeological and written evidence suggesting these memories were grimly precise. Trauma has a way of sharpening truth. Fear changes behaviour. You see people storing food more obsessively after a bad winter. Seeds are guarded fiercely. Children are fed differently. Risk-taking drops. Innovation slows. Survival becomes conservative by necessity. Here's a fringe belief whispered during harsh years. Speaking of abundance tempts loss. People avoid celebrating too early. Avoid saying winter is nearly done. Hope is handled carefully, like something fragile that might shatter if named aloud. Religious interpretation deepens famine memory. Bad winters are woven into moral narratives. Punishment, testing, purification. These explanations don't ease hunger, but they offer structure to suffering, and structure helps people endure. A documented fact underscores how deep these scars ran. Some medieval laws and customs changed permanently after severe famine winters, tightening grain storage rules or altering communal obligations. Winter didn't just kill, it reshaped society. You notice how elders watch the weather with intensity. Clouds are studied. Frost patterns read like omens. Experience replaces optimism. Having survived famine once makes you alert forever. As you sit near the fire, listening to stories told softly so children won't hear everything, you realise winter survival isn't only about enduring cold. It's about living with memory, carrying lessons etched by hunger and fear into every decision. Winter may end on the calendar, but its hardest years never truly leave. They stay, shaping choices, sharpening caution, and reminding everyone that survival is temporary and must be earned again each year. As winter drags on, practicality begins to blur into desperation. When fire, food, and faith feel stretched thin, people reach for anything that promises relief. Remedies multiply, some soothe, some harm. All reflect the need to feel less helpless against the cold. A clear historical fact anchors this turn. Medieval medicine relied heavily on humoral theory, especially in winter. Cold and damp were believed to unbalance the body, so treatments aimed to restore warmth and dryness, often with mixed results. You see strange mixtures prepared near the hearth. Wine warmed with herbs, animal fats rubbed into skin, poultices wrapped around chests. Some of these treatments help by retaining heat or easing pain. Others do little beyond distraction. Here's a quirky detail that feels almost surreal. People believed certain stones could warm the body if carried close. Smooth pebbles heated by the fire were tucked into pockets or bedding. The warmth faded quickly, but the ritual offered comfort. There's an open scholarly debate about how dangerous medieval remedies truly were. While some were toxic, many were mild and ineffective rather than lethal. The greatest risk often came from inaction or exposure, not treatment. You notice how winter amplifies belief in signs and cures. Amulets appear, charms are sewn into clothing, words are whispered over food. In a season where control is scarce, symbolism becomes medicine. Here's a fringe belief passed along in hushed tones. Cold can be tricked. If you convince the body it's warm, it will behave as though it is. This belief fuels placebo-like practices that sometimes genuinely help people rest and recover. Bloodletting continues in winter, though more cautiously. Too much blood loss in cold weather weakens patients dangerously. Experienced healers adjust practices, showing that even flawed systems adapt through observation. A documented fact adds gravity. Some medieval medical texts warn explicitly against overexertion and exposure during winter illness, advice that aligns closely with modern understanding. Not everything was ignorance. You see families experimenting quietly. One remedy fails, another tried. Knowledge spreads unevenly, shaped by rumour, success, and hope. As night falls, the fire crackles and someone rubs aching joints with warmed oil, you understand that winter remedies aren't just about cure. They're about participation, doing something, anything, against a season that feels unstoppable. In the absence of certainty, action itself becomes comfort. And sometimes, that comfort is enough to carry someone through another cold, waiting night. As you move between households, the contrast sharpens again, not just between rich and poor, but between expectation and reality. You've heard stories of noble comfort, roaring fires, heavy tapestries, endless food. Winter has a way of stripping myths down to their bones. A firm historical fact anchors this reassessment. Medieval nobles possessed more resources than peasants, but even elite households struggled to maintain warmth during winter. Large stone castles and halls were notoriously difficult to heat. Wealth changed the experience of winter, but it didn't eliminate hardship. You step into a great hall and feel the scale immediately. The ceiling rises far above the fire, swallowing heat as fast as it's made. Tapestries line the walls, not just for decoration but insulation. Thick wool and silk trap drafts, turning art into survival technology. Here's a quirky detail that feels oddly humbling. Nobles often complained bitterly about cold in their letters. Despite servants and fuel, fingers stiffened, breath fogged the air, and frost formed on stone walls indoors. Power doesn't bend physics. Food is more abundant here, but not infinite. Winter menus grow repetitive. Salted meats, bread, dried fruits, wine spiced to warm the blood. Spices matter. Cinnamon, cloves, and pepper aren't just luxuries. They're believed to fight cold internally. Whether they help or not, they signal control in a season that resists it. There's an open scholarly debate about whether nobles were healthier in winter. Better diets and housing improved odds, but crowding, travel, and political obligations exposed elites to disease just as easily. Comfort reduces risk. It doesn't remove it. Servants feel winter differently. Their labour keeps noble households functioning, hauling wood, tending fires, caring for animals. They sleep closer to kitchens and hearths, often warmer than their masters. Class and comfort don't always align the way stories suggest. Here's a fringe belief whispered among retainers. Nobles feel cold more sharply because they are unused to hardship. It's a quiet inversion of hierarchy, a way to reclaim dignity when inequality feels stark. A documented fact adds complexity. Some lords open their halls to tenants during extreme cold, offering shelter or food. Others closed ranks, protecting resources fiercely. Winter exposes character as much as status. You notice how ritual intensifies in elite spaces during winter. Feasts timed to religious calendars, elaborate ceremonies meant to impose order on chaos. Structure becomes insulation for the mind. As you leave the Great Hall, you carry a clearer picture. Wealth buys buffers, layers between body and cold, but winter still seeps through stone, silk, and authority. No one escapes it entirely. Survival here, as everywhere, is negotiated day by day. Even crowned heads count fires, watch stores, and wait for spring with the same quiet impatience as everyone else. Winter doesn't stop wars. It slows them, reshapes them, and makes them far more brutal, but it never truly ends them. When you picture medieval conflict, it's easy to imagine summer campaigns and green fields. Winter warfare is something else entirely. A solid historical fact anchors this danger. Medieval armies often avoided large-scale winter campaigns, but conflicts did continue through cold months, especially raids, sieges, and forced marches. When armies moved in winter, casualties from cold, hunger, and disease often exceeded those from combat. You feel it immediately as a soldier. Armour is cold to the touch, stealing heat from your body. Mail freezes stiff. Leather cracks. Weapons bite into numb hands. You can't fight well when you can't feel your fingers. Here's a quirky and grim detail. Soldiers sometimes slept sitting up, pressed together, because lying down on frozen ground drained heat too quickly. Exhaustion became routine. Sleep itself turned dangerous. Food is worse than at home. Armies strip the land bare as they pass, but winter landscapes offer little. Villages already stretched thin can't supply troops without starving themselves. This fuels resentment, rebellion, and cruelty. There's an open scholarly debate about whether winter warfare was strategically foolish or unavoidable. Some historians argue commanders understood the risks and avoided winter fighting when possible. Others point to political pressure, surprise tactics, or sheer desperation forcing armies into the cold. Winter doesn't care about strategy. Here's a fringe belief whispered among troops. Cold favours the defender. Frozen soldiers move slower, morale drops faster, and mistakes multiply. Winter becomes an ally to whoever can stay sheltered and fed the longest. Sieges drag on through winter more often than open battles. Stone walls don't feel cold. People inside starve slowly while attackers freeze outside. Both sides suffer, but defenders often endure better until food runs out. A documented fact underscores the brutality. Medieval chronicles describe armies losing thousands to exposure during winter marches, sometimes without ever meeting the enemy. Frostbite, dysentery, and pneumonia quietly emptied ranks. You notice how winter strips war of glory. Banners hang limp, drums fall silent. Fighting feels less heroic and more mechanical. Kill quickly, or retreat to warmth. Civilians suffer most. Winter armies take fuel, food, and shelter. Homes are burned not for conquest, but for heat denial. Survivors face the rest of winter with nothing. As you huddle under a thin cloak listening to wind whip across an empty field, you understand that winter warfare is endurance turned violent. Victory belongs not to the bravest, but to those who last. Winter doesn't choose sides. It simply adds itself as another enemy, often the deadliest one on the field. One morning something feels different. It's subtle enough that you almost dismiss it. The air still bites, the ground is still hard, but the light has changed. It lingers. Winter hasn't ended, but it has begun to loosen its grip. A clear historical fact anchors this fragile shift. Medieval people tracked seasonal change closely through daylight, church calendars, and natural signs. The lengthening of days mattered more than temperature. Light meant time, and time meant possibility. You notice it first at dawn. The sky brightens a little earlier. Work can start sooner without burning precious candles. Even 15 extra minutes of usable light feels like a gift. Here's a quirky detail that feels almost joyful. People listened for birds returning long before they were visible. A single call could lift a room's mood. Whether it meant real warmth or not, it meant winter wasn't absolute. There's an open scholarly debate about how accurately medieval people understood seasonal cycles. Some argue folk knowledge was remarkably precise. Others suggest hope often outran reality. Either way, recognizing change helped people endure. Food remained scarce. This is still the hunger gap. In many years, early spring is deadlier than deep winter. But morale improves. Hope adds energy calories food can't supply. Here's a fringe belief that spreads cautiously. Speaking of spring helps summon it. Songs change, stories shift. People talk about planting even though fields remain frozen. Imagination pushes against reality. Animals sense it too. Livestock grow restless. Chickens stir more. Milk increases slightly. These changes are small but noticed. Winter survival trains attention finely. A documented fact underscores the danger of premature optimism. Many medieval communities suffered after planting too early or overexerting themselves in false springs. Experience teaches restraint. You feel the balance returning between waiting and acting. Tools are checked again. Seeds are counted and hidden. Plans are made quietly, without celebration. As daylight stretches, the fire feels less like a lifeline and more like a companion. You still need it desperately, but you no longer fear its absence quite as sharply. Winter doesn't end with drama. It retreats inch by inch. Survival doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in breath taken a little easier, in shoulders loosening slightly. You sit near the door one afternoon, feeling sunlight touch the floor for the first time in weeks, and you understand why medieval people measured hope not in warmth, but in light. As the days grow longer, you begin to take stock, not just of what you've endured, but of what you've learned. Winter has been a teacher, patient and unforgiving, and its lessons settle into habits you don't even question anymore. A firm historical fact anchors this reflection. Many medieval winter survival strategies became permanent cultural practices, passed down through generations. Architecture, clothing, food preservation, and social customs all carried the memory of past winters embedded within them. You notice how nothing is wasted now, not even in moments of relief. Bones are still saved, tools still repaired carefully, extra firewood is gathered whenever possible. Winter has taught you that abundance is temporary, and preparation is never finished. Here's a quirky detail that feels quietly profound. Some medieval proverbs specifically warned against trusting good weather. Sayings like, "winter remembers," or "cold returns," echo through generations, shaping cautious behaviour long after snow melts. There's an open scholarly debate about whether medieval people were more resilient than modern societies, or simply had no alternative. Some historians argue constant exposure built remarkable endurance. Others suggest resilience was forced, not chosen. Either way, survival shaped identity. You feel it in your body. Movements are efficient now. You instinctively layer clothing, avoid sweating, pace your work. These habits will carry into other seasons. Winter never truly leaves you. Communal bonds feel different too. You trust people you've endured cold with. You remember who shared and who hoarded. These memories influence alliances, marriages, and disputes long after spring returns. Here's a fringe belief that circulates among elders. Surviving winter adds years to your life. Not literally, but in wisdom. Each winter survived is a lesson earned. Age is measured in cold endured, not birthdays. A documented fact reinforces this idea. Medieval legal and social systems often valued elders for their memory of past crises. Experience mattered, especially experience of hardship. You also sense caution in joy. Celebration waits. People repair before they rejoice. There's a quiet understanding that winter can return unexpectedly, even after signs of warmth. As you stand outside one afternoon, feeling thawing ground soften underfoot, you recognize winter's paradox. It weakens bodies, but strengthens systems. It kills, but it also teaches how to live. Survival here isn't luck alone, it's adaptation, slow, collective, imperfect. And as spring approaches, you carry winter's lessons forward, knowing they'll be needed again. Because winter always comes back, and next time, what you remember may matter as much as what you store. By the time winter finally loosens its hold, you realise something quietly unsettling. You didn't defeat it. You didn't conquer it. You simply outlasted it. And that, in the medieval world, is what survival actually means. A clear historical fact anchors this final understanding. Medieval people did not view winter as an enemy to overcome, but as an inevitability to endure. There was no illusion of control, only preparation, patience, and the hope of seeing the season end one more time. You look around at what remains. Houses are scarred, missing boards, patched roofs, smoke-darkened beams. Tools are worn thinner. Stores are emptier than planned. Some voices are missing. Winter always takes something. Survival is never clean. Here's a quirky but revealing detail. Medieval records rarely describe winters as won or beaten. They are described as passed, endured, or escaped. Language itself reflects humility before the season. There's an open scholarly debate about whether medieval life was defined more by suffering or by adaptation. Some argue constant hardship limited innovation and joy. Others suggest it fostered remarkable systems of resilience. Standing here, at winter's edge, you understand how both can be true at once. You notice how people don't rush into celebration. Relief comes slowly. Fires still burn. Food is still rationed. No one trusts warmth yet. Experience has taught caution better than any rule. Here's a fringe belief that feels almost philosophical. Winter spares those who wait. Impatience, overworking, overeating, over-travelling, kills as effectively as cold. Endurance is framed as wisdom. A documented fact reinforces this mindset. Medieval calendars often mark the end of winter, not by temperature, but by agricultural readiness. Survival was measured by whether you could plant again, not whether you felt comfortable. You feel the truth settle in your body. Survival isn't about strength, it's about restraint. About doing less when less is safer. About trusting systems built by those who survived before you. As the ground begins to soften and the air loses its sharp edge, you don't feel triumphant. You feel tired, older, changed. Winter has rewritten your sense of time, risk, and need, and that is the final lesson. Medieval winter survival wasn't heroic or dramatic. It was patient, communal, repetitive endurance. Night after night, choice after careful choice, until the season finally stepped aside. You breathe a little easier now, knowing you made it through, knowing others didn't, knowing you'll prepare differently next time. Because in the Middle Ages, survival didn't mean comfort, it meant waiting. As the story settles, you let your breathing slow. Winter fades behind you, not with celebration, but with quiet relief. The fire burns lower now, steady and safe. Outside, the world is changing inch by inch, and for once you don't need to rush it. You've walked through cold nights, thin meals, shared warmth, fear, faith, and patience. Let those images soften and drift. Let the crackle of the hearth blur into background sound. Let your shoulders loosen, your thoughts slow, your mind rest. Winter has passed. For tonight,